First of all, I want to thank Arav Misra, who is Meki freshman, coming to us live from his dorm. Rav, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you so that you can do your introduction, and I will also stop my share and I can put it up a little bit later.
Okay, wonderful. I hope everyone can hear me fine. And hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to the lecture. So my name is Arav Misra. As was mentioned, I'm a mechanical engineering freshman at Cal. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to actually welcome and introduce our speakers today, Mr. Kevin Chou, who's going to be having a conversation with Mr. Mike Li today. So both of our speakers are actually Cal alums, so it's great to welcome them back in a virtual capacity at least. And I was actually really excited to hear that I have the opportunity to introduce Mr. Chou and Mr. Li, as I'm quite interested in business, blockchain, and gaming, all topics which we'll hopefully hear more about today. So this was really a wonderful opportunity. So if you're interested in any of these topics, I'm sure you're in for a real treat. And I hope you enjoy the lecture. So to set the stage a little bit, I'll give a little bit of background on Mr. Chou and Mr. Li, who have been bestowed numerous awards, many awards and accomplishments, including being named in Fortune's 40 Under 40, CNN's Smartest People in Tech, and even UC Berkeley's Alumnus of the Year in 2019. So quite a comprehensive and exhaustive list. And for the sake of time, I'll cut that short, but Mr. Li actually graduated from Cal with a degree in electrical engineering and computer science. And after graduating from Haas magna cum laude, Mr. Chou went on to work as a VC. So this dynamic partnership later went on to found and build several companies, including Kabam, a mobile games developer, which was later sold for $1 billion. Mr. Chou is currently the chairman of Gen G, the parent company of world champion esports team Seoul Dynasty, and also founded Rally with Mr. Li, a blockchain-based platform for creators to create economies for themselves and their followers. So very forward-thinking and innovative companies. So I could go on and on about the long list of accomplishments and awards, but I'm sure everyone wants to hear from the real guests of honor. So in sum, it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome and introduce Mr. Chou and Mr. Li, and we're really excited and grateful you could come and speak to us today. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Arav.
Thanks, Arav.
Great introduction. Thank you.
It's always great to be back here at Cal, even virtually. Now, Kevin, we've worked together for 15 years, and even though we're both Cal grads, we actually didn't know each other when we were students here. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your journey to Cal and at Cal.
So I started my journey at Cal in '98, so it's been over 2 decades. It's feeling a little old, especially when I get introduced as Mr. Kevin Chou at I don't know if how you feel about that, Mike, but it makes me feel old, which is fine. But I grew up with immigrant parents. I moved to the United States a year before I was born, and so I had a little bit of a rough journey to get into with Cal at the very beginning, which was my father got laid off right the year before, or the year that I was going to Cal, and so we had a lot of talk about whether or not I would even go to Cal. Could we afford it? Should I do community college for a couple of years? And so there was a lot of talk about that. I spent my entire senior year focused on getting scholarships. And so every day I would go to the counselor, or every week go to the counselor and try to apply, find any random scholarship, even if it was a $200 scholarship, and apply for it, and eventually stitch together enough money that me and my father decided that, yeah, I'm going to go to Cal. So that's so I got into Cal and decided to go, and was also lucky to talk to the financial aid office at Cal that helped me out, and that was a really important thing. And so I've always wanted to give back to Cal because I just felt like there was a lot of just amazing karma to help me get into Cal and afford it and figure out that situation. And then at Cal, I had a lot of questions about what major I wanted to get into. I knew I was really interested in the undergraduate business program, but also thought about computer science and history, quite a bit. Ultimately decided to go for Haas and applied, and So yeah, so it's been 2 years or 1.5 years in the undergraduate general education program, and then 2 years at Haas. And then in between, I did I did a study abroad program in Hong Kong, which is part of the EAP program. I really enjoyed that too. So that was my journey through Cal, getting in and some of the hardships that I struggled with early on.
I'm trying to imagine you if you had gone through that computer science degree. I wonder how good of a programmer you would have been. I can give a quick overview from my own.
Yeah, I think we should talk about your background.
Yeah, my own journey is, so Kevin, I had, fairly different majors at Berkeley. Obviously, you with business and me through engineering. My background, I'm a native here to the Bay Area. I grew up in a pretty typical middle income kind of household. My mom's a doctor, my dad's an engineer. What's interesting is even though I got into Berkeley, into the engineering program, I had no intention to actually being an engineer. I was coming in to become a doctor. I was doing pre-med and all that stuff. And what kind of really made me change was, I almost failed out of organic chemistry. And at the same time, that's right when the dot-com boom was really taking off. And so it kind of made me rethink about like, oh, hey, maybe this engineering thing could be really interesting. So ended up dropping the pre-med and really pursuing the engineering side. So it's it's interesting how we ended up where we're at.
And I would just say, one of the things that was a really pivotal thing for me was when I remember when I was a junior at Cal. A venture capitalist, one of the most famous venture capitalists back then. He's, I think, semi-retired at this point. His name is John Doerr. He's famous because he was one of the original backers for Amazon and then Google and a bunch of other Genentech, and I think a bunch of other just amazing companies. And so he gave this talk at Haas, and I remember trying to get into this talk, and everyone was like sitting in the aisles. It was like a big fire hazard, but everyone's so excited, and I kind of got into the back of the auditorium and listened to a talk that he gave. And I never heard anything about venture capital before. I never met a venture capitalist in my life. And the fact that John Doerr, came to Berkeley to talk to students was just such a memorable event. And so, part of what hopefully, Mike and I later ended up becoming a VC. And so hopefully, Mike and I can inspire at least a few students here to take the entrepreneurial journey, which we're both very passionate about.
One thing I think is interesting to talk about is throughout our careers and maybe even at college as well, I think failure and struggle is often, a much more potent learning experience than success can be. Kevin, do you think you have any times that you might where you were, felt less than successful, and what happened while you were at Cal?
Well, I think my biggest setback was probably like immediately after Cal, and so so graduating from Haas, I was really interested to become an investment banker, and I got kind of my dream job coming out of Cal, which was to be a technology M&A banker. And so I ended up joining Deutsche Bank in 2002, which was at the dot-com crash was technically March of 2000. So this is 2 years after the dot-com crash, and it wasn't just dot-coms that crashed, it was the entire technology sector. But I was fortunate to get a job at Deutsche Bank in 2002, but a year later, there's another round of layoffs, and I ended up getting laid off from my job. And I was the only one. So basically, it's like, hey, it's a layoff, we got to do, but I was, the one targeted, and I felt like I was the one targeted, and I was the person who couldn't cut it in my class. And so that was a huge setback. And I had no idea, my entire career at Cal, I was like, if I could get into finance, that would be my dream job. And so it was a huge setback. And I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life at that point. I spent 4 years saying, "Oh, this is my dream," and was lucky enough to get a job in the industry. But then I actually didn't like the job. I didn't feel like I was particularly good at being an analyst at an investment bank. And so I spent 6 months just playing poker and doing other things, and not even looking for a job because I was so disoriented. And did a lot of soul searching, did a lot of trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And ultimately, I didn't know what I wanted to do next. But I needed to pay the bills. So after 6 months, I took a job with a startup. And it was just dumb luck, frankly, that I picked a great startup that I loved working at, and it had a nice exit. And then that gave me a foothold into the venture industry and so forth. But it was this period of time where, layoff and couldn't find a job and didn't know what I wanted to do next. That was a pretty tough moment coming out of Cal.
You and I both laid off at that time. Yeah, my first job.
Your startup was a different story, but yeah, you should tell it.
Yeah, so I came out. So after that whole debacle with organic chemistry, I kind of got really interested in startups as well, and I figured I really wanted to learn more about that. So it took a couple of that. Back in that time, there was very few actual entrepreneurship classes at Berkeley. I think there's a lot more now, which is great. But took an entrepreneurship class at Haas, and took another entrepreneurship class through engineering, and decided I really wanted to do a startup as join a startup as my first job. So I was lucky enough to join a startup. And speaking of John Doerr, it was a Kleiner Perkins and Sequoia founded company. I was like, oh, these guys, they know how to pick them, and so I was like, oh, this can't fail. And joined that startup, and then lo and behold, within 8 months, .com boom hit us as well, or .com crash hit us as well, and got laid off. And for me, it was that experience was still
the whole company shut down, right, Mike?
Yeah, the whole company ended up shutting down. We basically ran out of money. The last minute we were trying to find, we were trying to sell ourselves to Cisco or something like that, but didn't turn out. But that experience was still great in that it just further renewed my desire to be in startups. But I took a very decided decision to not jump to another startup at that point in time, and actually went and joined Accenture. In that I wanted to learn more about not just being an engineer, but learn more about best practices in the industry, being able to have some client-facing time and work on process and project management and product management and all that kind of stuff. So I spent a few years at consulting to kind of, in my view, well-round myself from just my pure kind of coding experience. And then that's when I decided to kind of jump back into startup world, which is when you and I met. Actually, even though we didn't meet at Cal, we actually had quite a few mutual friends, and through one of those mutual friends, who ended up was one of our co-founders, that's when we started our first company, which was Water Cooler. So I think it'd be good for us to chat about Water Cooler. We don't often get time to kind of reflect on the old times there, but we spent 10 years at that company, starting in 2006, building it, pivoting it, scaling it. But maybe we can talk about the very, very beginnings of that, right when we were making that decision to pull the trigger and quit our jobs, raise that first round. What do you remember about that, Kevin?
Well, I think the best part about Water Cooler is that we, those as a VC, I remember seeing a study about the causes of failures for a Series A funded company, and it was something very high. It's something like 40%, or almost half, I think, if I remember correctly, of our startups that failed because the founders, there's some like founder issues. And one of the nice things about Water Cooler is just we didn't really have founder issues. We always, even though things weren't going great, we actually, I thought that, it was just fun to hang out. And it wasn't even clear if we'd have a company. It was just like we were just working on a project when we first started. It didn't feel like much when we were, in a small little office above a pizza shop.
Dim sum shop.
But I think, one of the things I just thinking back to kind of a lesson that I wish I was told, in a talk like this when I was a student, was I took my first job because, so I did think I liked finance. I liked the classes. I liked, things about it. But truth be told, I also felt like when I looked for my first job, I was like, what job's going to pay for what job is going to have the highest pay? And I ended up taking a job that had the highest pay at Deutsche Bank over a few other things that I was interviewing for. And I felt like that was like the first lesson, which was don't just take the job that gives you the most money. Because especially as you're coming out of Cal, you're going to have such a long career ahead of you. And salaries in the technology world or startups or just in general, like more and more so in general across almost every field, is not a linear progression at all. And so, you can go just to put some numbers to things. I think if I remember correctly, bonus, everything, the investment banking, this is again, inflation adjusted, I think back to 2002. Investment banking was paying on the cover probably something like 100 or 120,000, somewhere in that range. And so I was like, wow, that's the job I wanted. That's fantastic. Versus other, some other job offers that I have were in the 50 to 70,000, range. My next job, when I went to go work for a startup, I took a job that paid $50,000. So massive, pretty big step backwards. And then I took a job in venture, which paid $200-some thousand. And so it's just these, it kind of doesn't matter. In the early days of career, it's more about learning and getting to work with people that you really enjoy working with. And then, of course, when we did water cooler, we paid ourselves like, was it like $18,000 a year or whatever minimum wage was back then. So, one of the things that sort of didn't matter was the money or the salary, at that time, because things have, over time just look so different. And it's more about, what you learn and what you get to do and build and who you get mentored from that I think is much more important in the early stages of a career. And then going to water cooler, I think, what I always enjoyed was just working with a great team. And we had to pivot many times, which I'm sure although we should cover all of those things, but the first thing that we built didn't work. Nobody used it. We didn't make any money from it. The second thing we built got lots of users, but we couldn't figure out how to make money. And throughout all those times of trying to figure out how to build a business, it just felt like, we were just trying to learn and enjoy working with each other and respect, kind of the skill sets and roles and responsibilities of everyone else. And, I had no idea how to build, the products. And so I kind of really trusted, you and Wayne to figure all that stuff out. And you guys did such an amazing job with that. So anyway, so that's what I learned. It's like my biggest reflection from water cooler was like, we're just lucky enough to have a really good team that worked well together from the get-go.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think you'll hear that when you talk to VCs. It's much more about investing in the team than the idea. Ideas, maybe they're not quite dime a dozen. They oftentimes, the idea you start with, definitely is not the idea you end with, and that was certainly true in our case. Victoria, I see you're asking, what we were trying to do when we first started it. Water cooler at the very beginning, the idea was to build this is 2006, so these are the days of Friendster and MySpace. Facebook, was not even really a thing just yet. It had just been barely started. And so we were talking about doing a more business focused kind of social network and trying to build something that could a business could sort of implement at their site, almost like an intranet kind of replacement. And obviously from that we pivoted, many times into both consumer and then social, and ultimately into games and mobile games. So it's quite, we kind of joke about it sometimes, Kevin and I, but like it was really like 4 startups in one during those years. The other thing I was going to echo what Kevin was saying was that it's easy to think about when you're coming out of Cal, like, okay, yeah, what is that job, and how much are they paying me, and stuff like that. But I always like to tell folks to think about, if you think about your longer lifetime ahead of you, there are just certain things that may make your appetite for risk harder, and certainly pulling the trigger to start a company is a risky thing, but it only gets more risky, and you may not have the ability to take that risk if you end up if you're married, or if you've got kids, or if you got a mortgage. And so I think one of the things that Kevin and I always really try to encourage is, if you want to be an entrepreneur, it's you should try to start early. Earlier is great, and ultimately I think even if it fails, it's not going to be that failure is not going to devastate your future earning potential. In fact, it probably helps it, in that the stuff that you've learned during that experience will probably make you stronger, or make you even a more attractive candidate in whatever next job you do apply for.
And that's a really important point, Mike, because you and I have hired a lot of people over the last 15 years.
Thousands of people, yeah.
Thousands of people. We like founders, people who've started companies and failed and have learned something really important for them that clearly has helped them grow and learn. And we love hiring those people. So it honestly is a great experience to go out and try something. And what I've also learned is that there's no substitute for starting a startup. There's literally no job that you can get that will help you figure out how to start a company. It is an oddly singular experience that is the only way to really do it is to go through the journey yourself. And so it does seem really scary. Mike and I talked a lot, along with our other co-founders, like, well, what if this fails? Like, oh my gosh, of course, there's all these articles about the statistics of, what the success rates of startups are and so forth. But the reality is that you learn a lot, by going through it. And of course, if you're successful, it's just it's an amazing journey, and the only way to figure it out is to go do it, or join an early stage startup. That's certainly another nice benefit too.
Yeah, I think just the aspect of the sheer number of hats that you have to wear, or the sheer amount of things that you have to figure out solutions for, is not just, how do I figure out how to write this code, or it's how do I scale it up? How do I hire people? How do I manage people? How do I go help put together a demo for our next fundraise, or all those things are stuff that you just get exposed to. Even if you stumble through them, you're still learning along the way, and you're coming up with forced to think in clever or practical or scrappy ways that I think just force your brain to kind of grow. So I think there's a lot a lot to learn when you do a startup, or you're joining an early stage startup, like you said. I think one of the things I've always been super impressed about you, Kevin, I kind of always joke about this too, is the joke, you have a silver tongue when it comes towards crafting a story about what we're trying to do. Whether that's when we're trying to recruit somebody, or we're trying to go out and raise more money. And I think that's kind of one of your singular abilities. And going a little bit back to what we were talking about before, I think it's important to emphasize the fact that our team worked really well, because I think we had very clear roles, right? Kevin was the business guy and the fundraiser. I am I was the one of the engineer. One of our other co-founders was the product designer. So I think that definitely reduced a lot of the potential friction that we had. But going back to the story thing, maybe you can talk a little bit about crafting stories.
Well, it's funny. Growing up, my parents moved to the United States a year before I was born, so they spoke very little English, and so I was in ESL in elementary school, and a very traumatic thing happened where I was giving a presentation in front of class and didn't say things right, and it was just a very traumatic experience for me. And public speaking was just always a very, I literally we would give these like book reports or other things, and I would memorize and rehearse a 1 or 2 minute talk for days. And I would memorize every word. I would look up the pronunciation for every word. And so I was always really afraid of talking to people. I'm still, now I can disentangle, like I'm both an introvert, but I also had this like fear of speaking issues growing up. And maybe that's why I spent so much time trying to get better at it, but certainly started from a place where I was not very good at talking to people and being very, the idea of giving a presentation to a room full of investors, which happens in the fundraising context, is just literally it was just something I would be always afraid of. And I think but I realized, when we were looking death, in the eyes, like, so one of the things that happened was when we raised our Series B, Lehman Brothers had gone bankrupt, and it was this 2008 timeframe where we were trying to raise some money. And I spent 9 months raising our Series B. Got rejected by, I don't know, something like 100 investors over 9 months. But I knew we had to get money, or else we would, we would go bankrupt. And so part of the nice things about trying to raise money from 100 different investors, is I got to really practice, telling a story and understanding what I was communicating and how to communicate it. And so certainly got a lot of practice. But then I just realized that, fundraising was really important, recruiting people was really important, developing business partnerships was really important. And that's, if I wanted to be the business person and do that well, I needed to develop these skills. And so even if I wasn't naturally good at it, I just tried to work hard at it. And because I realized that was like my role to play at water cooler. So that's kind of how I thought about it.
Yeah, I remember that day. I remember the day we were going to close was the day the stock market crashed, and then the wire never came in that day, and it actually never came ever from that particular VC firm.
No, I spent 9 months after that.
Exactly, it was super traumatic. I remember that.
Yeah.
Vicky is asking a question in chat here. Do you remember what our hook was when we first were speaking to investors?
Well, so it takes some time to learn, but there's an art to being authentic and I wouldn't quite say vulnerable. Vulnerable is probably not the right thing when you're talking to investors, but it's almost being vulnerable. It's sort of, talking about, it's both being aspirational and painting a big vision. I think a lot of, well, first of all, I should say, investors are very different. There are investors that are very risk-seeking. And I think probably in 2021, the investors that are making the news now, when you talk about the Sequoias and the Andreessen Horowitzes and the, whatever's these days, when you read, more importantly in 2021, they're blogging, they're on Twitter, of course, they're speaking at conferences. It's become really apparent in our hyper sophisticated economy these days that you have to be on the bleeding edge. That's where the amazing things are born, right? It's like Amazon for so long was laughed at. It's like, oh, this thing will never be profitable, never be worth anything. Tesla is ridiculous that you're going to go compete against other car companies, whatever, right? It's like, in fact, if you really step back in time, and I know it's hard, if you're just if you're a freshman in college right now, you may not remember the early days of Tesla and certainly the Amazon, but these things were sort of, they're common wisdom by the investment communities that these were stupid companies. And Facebook, back in the early days. And so, but I think investors have come to realize over time with 20 plus years of venture investing, modern day venture investing, that you want to be on the edge. You want to be on the bleeding edge potentially if you're trying to raise money from certain types of investors. And then it also means you can also raise money if you're trying to create a physical product and sell it, and it's more of a traditional business. There's also investors that are backing restaurants and backing or restaurant chains or physical goods and new e-commerce services. So it's really just, I think the hook is understanding who your investor is and making sure you're authentic you're confident, and your business and your strategy for your business is aligned with what the investor is looking for. I think that's what I learned over time was most important, to get all of those things aligned together.
Maybe this is a good time now to kind of talk about what we're up to these days, since we sold Kabam in 2017, and we've been fairly busy since then. So Kevin and I have since gone on to found 4 more companies that are all currently around and doing well, and those are Genji Esports, Rally, and Forte. And can we talk about Super Layer and Super Layer right now? And I thought maybe it'd be interesting to just kind of that does seem a little extreme, but it actually I was going to talk about how that logical how they all came out kind of in a logical manner. So after Kabam, frankly, I was actually going to take off. I was take some time off. I was going to move. I moved to Paris for a few months. Just eating croissants every day. And then Kevin gave me a call. He's like, hey, I was thinking about doing this esports thing. Mike, can you move back to Korea? I was living in Beijing for a while, running our Kabam China office. Can you move back to Korea to help me go start this esport thing? And so I was like, interesting. And so I think we both thought about it as maybe at that time, like, a fun kind of hobby. It'd be fun to own esports. We like playing games. It'd be fun to own a team. And then I think the more we dug into it, the more we realized that there could be real opportunity in esports as a business. And the more we dug into it, that's kind of where we really started to pay attention to these players we had, right? So we have these professional players who are, I'll admit they're not super charismatic. They're not good looking, but man, they are great at the games they play. And we would hold these fan events, and we'd have these crazy fans screaming to take their pictures with these esport players. And that kind of opened our eyes to an aspect of gaming that we hadn't encountered before, which is the power of fandom. And of course, through that, we managed these players. We got to understand their economies. We got to understand, their relationship with the platforms they streamed on, or the games they played, or the places they hosted their content, and got to understand kind of the economics behind creators. And that was where we kind of got our exposure to creators. Now, in our time at Kabam, it was very much about virtual economies, games, free-to-play games, virtual currencies, virtual items. And we kind of thought about like, oh, hey, this is something really interesting if we can put these two things together. And we thought our first idea was very much around, virtual baseball cards for these creators, in which nowadays, of course, NFTs are, all over the news and stuff like that, but it wasn't necessarily the case back in early 2018, late 2017. But, I think as we started getting into it, we're like, what is potentially even more interesting than just building out a virtual baseball card for these creator economies? But, could we do something at the real base unit of what a creator economies is, or what an economy is? And that goes down to currency. And so that's where Rally got its start, is in terms of building a platform to allow creators to create their own cryptocurrency that can power their own economies, no matter where they're at. So that's kind of that shows the path to go from, from our traditional gaming or, mobile gaming company, where we learned about virtual economies and virtual currencies, to our esports business, where we learned about creators and creator economies and their relationships and how they manage the economies, and then kind of combining them to create Rally. And then from Rally, we knew that if you wanted to tip your creator $1 because he said a really funny thing, you wouldn't pay $5 or $10 in Ethereum fees. So we knew it had to exist on a side chain or on a different blockchain. And we looked around and we couldn't find one, so we decided to start our own. And that kind of was where Forte came about. And so you can see these kind of logical steps to where these businesses that Kevin and I are working on right now kind of came from. So on that note, Kevin, what do you think? What are you most excited about?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think I'm really excited about crypto in general. I feel like 2021 was the year where culturally there was just a lot of awareness about crypto in a very different way than before. I think before it was like, what is Bitcoin? Oh, that's sort of weird. It's like, like Bitcoin and I think Ethereum got lumped into that. It's like, oh, all these like things, are they just worthless? Like what's the point of having these things? And then, okay, maybe you like double click on the technology a little bit and you're like, okay, what's a blockchain? What's a distributed ledger? Is it just a big database? That's, what's so unusual about that? To finally, oh, here's an NFT. Oh, I can buy this NFT that, and it's like a different thing. And oh, I got to figure out how to navigate Ethereum and get a wallet with some ETH in it, so I can pay my transaction fees. And so I think there's much more broader understanding that crypto is not just. And I think there's a misnomer in cryptocurrency because you think, oh, it's just like a form of money. Well, what's the good of Bitcoin? What's the good of Ethereum if it's just a piece of money? But I think having been in technology or in software development for so long, it's like, no, it's a development platform. It's building something on Ethereum or another blockchain is very liberating. It's much better than building on Facebook or Apple or Google or anything else. It just feels like we can build on this thing without worrying about, eventually ending up in court like Epic versus Apple or something like that, because the rules change or the platform is doing something that is at odds with its developer. And so I think that's what's so exciting about crypto today is just the ability to build new consumer applications on Web3 and to have kind of this global internet money as well as a development platform where you can build new experiences. And I think we're going to see in 2022 that, obviously this is what we're doing at SuperLayer, but and we're just a part of the overall movement. But I think in 2022, we're going to see really kind of consumer scale, consumer crypto products come to market, because I think the scalability, the throughput, the usability are all getting solved with various different infrastructure and technology advancements in the industry. So I think we're going to see just a lot more consumer products come around. Certainly a lot of games, but a lot of other kind of anything that could be user generated. I think whether it's a social network, something like YouTube, something like Reddit, something like Twitter, all of these things are going to get reimagined in a crypto world, and it won't just be a currency anymore. It'll be a real software. You're going to, I think, see a lot of different types of software come to market. So I'm pretty excited about that, and just seeing 2022 come around to launch some of these new products that we know are coming to market.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that in that, I mean, obviously we work in crypto, but I think this is, I think we talk about it. I think this is crypto is probably the single biggest wealth generation event, technology that's going to be in our lifetimes, probably maybe not our entirety of our lifetimes, but one of them. What's
funny is I thought that about the .com boom, and then the Web2 boom came around, and I was like, wow, we were kind of in the middle of it, right? With Kabam, but we were like first-time entrepreneurs, couldn't raise any money versus, we look around and all these other, like some of our competitors in the gaming or other spaces, they'd be raising $20 million, and oh my gosh, we can't even scrape together, $500,000. And yeah, certainly crypto feels a lot bigger, but it feels like, I don't know if I would agree with that. I think there's some things, whether it's AI or some of the things that are happening in the biotech sphere, space, exploration, climate change related things, energy, renewable energy. I think we're going to see a lot of really exciting things happen that really change, that are really innovative and change. I think that's one thing that, I don't know, in our 15 years together doing entrepreneurial stuff, Mike, I think the world's just moving faster. Who thought when we were starting Water Cooler, who would have thought that the automotive industry would be disrupted, by a technology,
right.
entrepreneur?
Or there'd be self-driving cars these days.
It's crazy, right? It's like, it's touching everything, agriculture, biotech. Yeah, it's just, I think we're going to see innovation come to a lot of different industries. And so I think there's going to be some pretty interesting wealth creation events. So don't worry if you're a current Cal student. I think there's going to be lots of exciting stuff frankly, a lot more than when we graduated Cal.
Certainly. I think, but that being said, I think I would encourage everyone, maybe because it's self-serving a little bit, but if you're not already researching or learning about crypto, I think it's a great thing to learn about. Yeah, I think we're probably at a good time now to, maybe kind of wrap it up a little bit and kind of talk about, maybe some key takeaways.
Get to the questions.
Yeah, or even get to questions. I don't know how do the questions, how's the Q&A work, Vicky?
Thanks. So we'll go ahead and bring students on and they'll ask questions when you are ready. I know people are excited to ask you some things. So you can either wrap up now or just we can go into questions. Up to you.
I think Mike, what's your biggest learning lesson that you would go back to Cal? If you're a student today and listening to somebody like us, old farts like us, talking, rambling, what would you want to know? It's one thing.
Yeah, I would. I think what you said earlier about, don't just pick the job for the money, but pick the job, particularly your first job or first couple of jobs, for what you think you can learn and the experiences you can have, I think is a key critical thing. That stuff that you learned there will speak a lot more in your future career searches or whatever you do. It can dramatically change how the trajectory of your career. I think if you take some risks earlier on, and even if they fail, it's not. It may feel like a big thing, but actually, I don't think it is a big thing in the long term view of your guys' careers.
Yeah, I think for me, my biggest advice would be, go figure out what's weird and wacky, and it's sort of almost a platitude to say go do what you love, or go find out what you're really passionate about and go do that. But I kind of think I certainly agree. I think there's a ton of wisdom in there. If I were to try to put a different take on it or different spins to help it make it feel more real, it's go figure out what's weird and wacky about yourself, and the crazy thing is we live in a world where now you could be weird and wacky and go on the internet and find millions of people just like you, and it's so when we started a gaming company, we didn't start exactly as a gaming company, but we pivoted into we always had a gaming component to what we did, but then we just decided, hey, we're gonna Mike and I would be playing games at night along with all of our employees at Water Cooler. And so when we were having some real difficulty, why don't we just make games? And nobody would have thought you can make a good career in games. So it was something that we're just lucky to take something that we like doing and go build new products and embrace, at that time it was cloud computing plus this kind of free to play or in-app transaction model that was really different. And so by being weird and on the edge and embracing some of these new trends relatively early, but you could sort of see how it was better for, it could make something better for the customer or the user. It just turned into cool things that eventually led us into crypto, because by creating all these virtual swords and skins and so forth, we ultimately probably had a front row seat into why crypto was interesting. And now we're seeing obviously a lot of crypto games come to the fore and be worth many billions of dollars. So anyway, I think that's kind of my advice. Find what's weird and interesting, find your weird curiosity and really try to think about how to do something around that. Yeah,
the other thing I would say is that the state of the state of the world these days, or the tools these days, are so dramatically different from when you and I started. Right now, people can, using just existing websites and tools that exist, you can cobble together. You can build websites without coding. You can build functionality. Without having to write a single line of code, just by stitching together, one service to another service. So I think you can experiment a lot more with ideas in a way that's without requiring a whole team or a lot of money. So I think that's great for the entire space. So with that, I think let's go to some questions.
Yeah, I think Roman, I'm not sure what's weird and freaky about you, or actually, it's not exactly what you said. I'm sorry, Kevin, weird, but ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much, Mike and Kevin, for coming today. I'm interested in the gaming industry, so to hear from you two is honestly just, I'm bedazzled here. And my question is, with Rally, Forte, Kabam, Genji, I'm a fan of some of the players there. Where do you see the gaming industry going, and what's in store for the future? And this is a, kind of a two-part question. Your specialties with blockchain, crypto, and NFTs. So I'm interested in where you see the future going, with these technologies, and then where it's going, outside of these technologies in the larger sphere of the industry.
Well, I think, in the gaming industry, actually, really big, there's a few big conferences in the gaming industry, but one of the really interesting industry, events is called GamesBeat, which is tied to VentureBeat. Yeah, I would say, just having gone through we just pre-recorded all this stuff, and I would say half of the tracks and focus is on NFT and crypto. So I feel like the gaming industry is 2021 to 22. It's probably one of the biggest trends in gaming is that. I would say the other thing that is sort of a cycle ago, but I don't think it's gone yet, is AR, VR. So I do think, it's cooler these days to say metaverse. And of course, metaverse means a lot of different things to different things. It has some overlap or intersection with crypto and other things too. But I do think virtual worlds, AR, VR, like technologies that allow people to be in a different place physically, or to be in sort of a different digital place, and have an identity, have a presence, interact with other people, is going to be really interesting. So I think that's another huge trend in the gaming industry. I think we're going to see another resurgence of that. And then I think, the other thing about games is that I think we're just getting to the point, and certainly crypto helps with this, but I think you could do it without crypto, with designing very community-driven games. How do you build things? How do you build games with a community? And I think Kickstarter started this a long time ago. And I think we're just getting to the point now where you can really embrace, like, how do you build something with, Twitch streamers and gaming influencers on YouTube and other things, and like build the game with the community. And I think that's something that's going to be really interesting. We're going to see a lot of innovation there too. And then,
Mike, I didn't know.
Mike, you want to touch on NFT or crypto outside of gaming?
Well, the thing I was going to say was, back when we were selling Kabam, a lot of people asked us, like, okay, hey, what's the next big thing after mobile gaming, right? And I think people were hunting around for what's the next platform, right? So that's where a lot of the hype around AR and VR kind of came, and I think it kind of came and kind of went. And like Kevin said, I don't think it's gone, but it didn't really become the next big thing. And I think what we're seeing now, it's everyone was hunting for what the next platform is, and I don't think it's actually a platform. I think it's this concept of ownership and what these, what blockchain NFT kind of brings. And I think it's the next big thing is not a platform, more just changing a little bit of the dynamics between game makers and game players, and using this concept of ownership and NFTs and currencies and stuff like that, and using that in a way to align the game maker and the game player, versus before it's very much the game maker and the game player are, they're aligned around enjoyment, but not necessarily aligned around economic, because it's the game maker's job to find a way to extract money from the game player, kind of thing. So I think that's kind of touching on kind of what I think the next thing in terms of gaming is, which is obviously where we're playing. So I mean, that's why we're doing what we're doing right now.
That's
Awesome.
fantastic.
Thanks
Thanks,
so much.
Roman. I'm going to ask Manan to come on, and I think they have a question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, it's really an honor to speak to you today. So I was kind of wondering a little bit more if you could talk about some of the specific technology that you utilized in your products, And maybe a little bit more about how blockchain within the context of gaming actually works. Like, you know, if you could give a mini lesson or some like thing that I could learn from that, that would be great.
I'll take this, Mark.
Technologies. I mean, I'd say, you know, we are a very Ethereum-based shop, both in terms of you know, playing on mainnet Ethereum in terms of the RLY rally token, but also the basis of the Forte sidechain is also Ethereum based, and you know, just the ecosystem that Ethereum provides in terms of the sheer amount of tools and the flexibility of its smart contracts, the composability between all these different projects, I think is super good. That being said, you know, we are actively also looking at some of the other L1s these days, particularly as we start thinking about some of the scale that's going to be needed when we talk about the intersection of not just currencies, but NFTs. Like if you think about some of our games that we built at Kabam, and now instead of every sword or every shield or every, you know, crop or whatever it was that we built in our games being an actual NFT or being an actual item on the chain, you know, that scalability, you know, really comes into play. So, you know, while I think Ethereum has been great, and obviously they recognize the challenges of scaling and they're actively trying to solve it, we've also been looking into some of the other L1s. You know, Solana is one that comes to mind that we're particularly excited about, that you know, have the promise of addressing some of that scalability.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
That's great. Kevin, I didn't know if you want to respond, or we can go to Aditya's question.
Was there a second part of your question, Manon, besides the technology? I think there was another.
Yeah, I think actually a little bit more was just about like the specifics of how blockchain within the context of gaming would work, other than I guess like the NFTs, or is there any other major aspect?
Yeah, so what blockchain does, one way it's sort of simplistic, but it's a good first step. It's the thing about blockchain is like a big database, and if you don't know what a database is, like just think about a big Excel spreadsheet. It's like every cell in the Excel spreadsheet is a thing that can be owned by somebody. Like you put something in it, and then you can own it. And so and it's weird because it's all digital. It's like, why would I want to own this thing in a cell on an Excel spreadsheet? Well, if that thing is an NFT of a CryptoPunk or something that's really interesting and rare and verifiably rare, because you could see the whole point is that you could see the entire spreadsheet at any given point in time, and that nobody can change the spreadsheet or database in a way that benefits themselves. They have to, you know, for any of the big blockchains these days, they have very sophisticated consensus and security and mining mechanisms and validation networks that no one person can change it. Like all these random computers have to agree that cell, you know, that your NFT, you know, like Kevin bought the NFT from you. And that can all be proven out with cryptography and the way that the software is, you know, developed these days. So the idea of, you know, when you play a game, and if you're into certain types of games, and certainly MMOs, or if you're into like League of Legends, you know, for example, when you buy the skin for Misfortune or something like that, and like the fact that instead of it just being you know, for League, it's all cosmetic. But anyway, the point is that like if you buy that thing, you really own it. And then, you know, let's say you go to a Halloween shop, right, and you buy a little Batman costume or something. Like, if you own that, you can go give it away to somebody else. You could, you know, let's say you bought it for $20, you could sell it for $10 next year and buy a new costume. Yeah, but you really own the thing. But if you play a game and you buy, you know, that Misfortune skin or something like that, you don't really own it. You're just renting a license to it. And once you stop playing the game, that's it. And so the really interesting aspect is how do you create real ownership of digital assets? And that's what owning that one cell in that Excel spreadsheet, and you'll be able to do whatever you want with it, is so interesting when it comes to games.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was super helpful.
Thanks. I know that Aditya, you have a question. You'd put something, but you had a little bit of a different spin on it. Do you want to ask your question, Aditya?
Sure. Well, first, thank you both for coming out today. I'm curious, as in the esports industry, with lots of the revenues coming from like brand sponsors and things like that, and organizations needing to like deliver impressions to those sponsors, do you think there's a problem with hyper focusing on like delivering impressions, and how in like your organizations you've been able to like solve that kind of tendency to just deliver whatever the sponsor that's giving you money wants?
Yeah, it's an interesting day to ask this question because FaZe Clan, is backing at $1 billion. But I would say this: I would say all the leading esports teams are not focused on. Well, nobody thinks that the way to grow a very successful esports organization is to focus on the sponsors. Now, the sponsors are. You get to a point, and we're certainly there at Gen G now after 4 years, but certainly like the phases, the Cloud9s, the Liquids and TSMs and so forth. You get to a point where like you're able to, all of the deals now are multi-year deals, generally 3 years. Sometimes they're even more. TSM signed a 10-year deal, with FTX, and so. You can, when you can sign these multi-year deals, and they're generally, all multi-seven-figure deals now, it's a fine source of revenue, but it's not a way to build a great business, over at the scale of what is generally considered, a technology or venture-backed business. But it's fine. It'll get you to a few tens of millions of dollars of revenue. I think what you see sort of FaZe doing is focusing on the lifestyle, the apparel, the television and other shows that they're now doing. You see like 100 Thieves and others focus on apparel. What Gen G focuses on is education. Actually, we've got a fantastic education business, so we really focus on working with universities and also with high school and middle school students. So anyway, so I think what you're going to see is a lot of teams, and just like the analog, and again, there's always differences but valuable learnings. If you look at some of the most valuable professional sports teams in the world, it's generally because they've got a great media business or a real estate business, right? They own their own stadiums. There's a big shopping center plus restaurants and retail and all this other stuff, and they own those things. And so it's really, if you look at sports teams, they're sort of a combination of the franchise rights plus whatever other core parts of their business. And I think in esports you're going to see kind of the same thing, where the sponsorships are a fine like base thing, but then every team is figuring out like what is the other thing that they're developing as the other pillar to their business.
That totally makes sense. Thank you so much.
I'm muted. I apologize. I'm excited to have Grace ask a question next. I just think that often we think about crypto and we think about sports and gaming as being so male-oriented, but I've got 2 daughters who are obsessed. And so it's kind of fun to have Grace ask a question.
Hi, I think you guys kind of touched on this before, but I'm really interested in the creator economy, and I'm also actually writing a book right now about that. So would love to also talk to you guys one-on-one sometime if possible, but just wanted to see your thoughts on the future of the creator economy, specifically around decentralized platforms and like this idea of creators being able to own their own networks and platforms, and how that's different from more of like the Web 2.0 that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, so one of the confusing things about crypto is there's many different words that are used to describe it. Decentralized is one of the, so generally when you hear a decentralized creator platform, it's generally crypto or Web3. Like crypto generally refers to maybe more value. Web3 will refer to kind of the usage models and the technology and the like business model, the user experience of having to use a wallet plus bunch of other stuff. And then decentralized generally refers to this idea of like, it's not Facebook, where it's not going to become a Facebook. So anyway, so when you say decentralized, I think you mean crypto, but maybe not, I don't know. And I think the idea of why crypto is so important is that um, I'll refer to kind of two generations of the creator economy. The first is kind of what YouTube and Twitch pioneered, which is, hey, we create this thing, or even Twitter or Instagram. It's like, we create this thing, it's kind of like a social network, but then a few people emerge as kind of these, people with millions of followers, and then become the, this thing. But the platform was never built with creators in mind. It just happened that a few people became huge, right? And so generally they don't really share very much revenue. In fact, it was like a big deal that YouTube started sharing revenue with creators. And if you look at Instagram or like TikTok, until recently, they didn't share any revenue. You created content for their platform and they kept all of the revenue, right? And then you have sort of Gen 2 stuff that Patreon ushered in, and then now there's like, I don't know, Koji, and just tons of creator platforms now. And the challenge with them is that they always, the core of their business is generally they take some percentage of your revenue, which is not bad, right? And generally in a lot of these cases, they're trying to build a great business, and they're trying to build a business that helps creators. And so if a creator makes, $1,000 on their platform, maybe they take 8% of it. If you're making, $1 million, maybe they drop their fee to like 5% or something like that. But at the end of the day, their business is like, they can grow the pie only so much. And so you look at earlier technologies like eBay is a good one, where it's like, hey, come and sell stuff on eBay. And then when their growth slowed, they just charge more and more fees. And so generally what happens is in these Web 2 platforms, the pressure of going public and meeting your quarterly numbers, like, how do you do that? Well, you charge more fees. Well, who pays those fees? Well, it's ultimately the creator that pays the fees. And so obviously there's going to be great businesses built here, like Patreon, I think does a great job. But at some point they're going to go public. At some point when they go public and they've got quarterly numbers and public market investors, there's always going to be the core thing that the CEO, I guarantee, of that company will be thinking about, Jack is going to be thinking about, is how do I meet my quarterly numbers and what am I promising to creators? And those things are not always aligned. Now we come into a decentralized world. And I think in a decentralized world or a crypto world, the beauty of building on Ethereum in general is that our interests are not at odds with Ethereum's interests. There's no Ethereum company trying to make their quarterly numbers. Ethereum is this open source protocol. It's decentralized. There's no company running it, blah, blah, blah. And so there's no worry that they're going to take more of our revenue to meet whatever their shareholders or board of directors is instructing them to do. And then we, in turn, because we build on Ethereum, we sort of pass it out. So we try not to be a company, and we try to say, hey, how do we create something for creators at Rally that allows a creator to truly own their own economy? They could create their own social tokens and NFTs, and they could build their own community and fans. And let's say a fan wants to pay you $50 for that NFT, we don't even charge anything. You keep all $50. Like, how we're able to do this is because we're not trying to be a company that goes public or have shareholders that we have to answer to in a traditional sense. And I think that's why the Web3 and a decentralized world is so powerful, is that it creates a very different model where there's a lot of talk in crypto and blockchain and decentralized world about incentive alignment and governance. How do we create a world where it's not a corporation in the traditional sense that is running the thing and has different incentives with users or creators on a network? And that's why that's why we started Rally. So, and of course there's other alternatives to Rally, but I think in general, obviously we're big fans of a decentralized creator platform, because the whole idea is we don't have to charge a fee, creators keep everything, and everyone's aligned, with the overall incentives.
Mike, I didn't know if you had anything that you wanted to add. So
No, I think that's a good answer.
There's so much passion in what you're saying and so much focus in what both of you all had said. I am just curious. I do see Mike's cat in the background, so I can't help but ask, how is it now that you all relax? Do you still play games?
No, well, I mean, life is, for me, I've got 2 young kids and all these businesses and these cats. So I don't have a lot of time to play games anymore, unfortunately. Now I relax sometimes by just actually watching Gen G play. It's funny. I watch other people play games, which kind of sounds kind of funny, but it's kind of become my replacement to watching sports, because I can just watch it on YouTube and stuff like that these days. But yeah, I mean, we still I think make time for. I mean, I think it's the same for Kevin. He can corroborate, but we still make time for family and doing that stuff, and that's maybe a little bit of a position of privilege. Like if we were just starting right now, we probably couldn't. But that kind of goes back to what I was saying. Like, we don't. Life is just the way it is now. I can't work 18 hours a day like I did when we first started Water Cooler. So I'm glad I started it when I did. But nowadays, yeah, real life is hit, and we still find time to relax, but it's actually still a lot of work too.
Yeah, well, I think family is obviously really important. I've got young kids as well, and so I think spending time with family is really important, and friends. I still play a little bit of games, but I'm so bad at them that I generally don't admit to playing games anymore because I'm too bad to play with. Yeah, it'd be funny if you saw my League of Legends. Yeah, we've never played League of Legends together because it'd be embarrassing if anybody played League of Legends with me. But yeah, reading, spending time with family, hiking, being outdoors, I think is really important to me and my family. So I try to do quite a bit of that.
That's wonderful. We have 2 student questions, but just FYI, I'm sure people that would raise a lot of money if you would offer to play games with people, by the way, just a thought, both of you. Azine, I think you had a question.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for being here today. My question is I have 2 questions actually. If there's a time I can ask, my first question is how much the things that you learn in a school, educational things that you learn in a school, how much it helped you in your entrepreneur journey? And my another question is so I'm going back full time to work in Amazon, but in the same time, so I had my contract with them and everything, but in the same time, I'm working on my business idea. And just this week, I patent my provisional patent to be able to hand my product to customers to test it. So I was thinking after some time when my business grows enough, I leave my job in Amazon and work on my business full time. But in the same time, I feel like working in Amazon is a bit distraction. I know you touched on that, but I just wanted to hear your opinion about that. So.
You want to take a mic or?
I mean, I can talk about the first part a bit. If I think back to, my time at Berkeley, certainly, my first jobs and my first role at Water Cooler was very much coding, but in reality, it wasn't necessarily it wasn't like the specific coding languages I learned at university or any of the specific ways any of the more sophisticated computer science theories or anything like that. It was more just the way to think, and the way to think, the tenacity to kind of power through a problem in a scrappy way. I think that's kind of what mostly I think ended up powering my our entrepreneurship career, and that may be different if we had started some really AI or machine learning or something like that. That's a little bit more sophisticated from a technical perspective. But our businesses were consumer internet businesses in the first company, and so I think a lot of that just kind of came down to knowing how to solve problems and working with teams on how to solve problems. Not specifically a particular theorem or something that I learned.
I think there's certainly some classes that were very like skill specific. So the one that comes to mind is accounting. I didn't like those classes at Haas, but they came in really useful to being an entrepreneur, and like I didn't want to learn that stuff ever again in my life, and so it's kind of really nice that I took it as a part of a structured program at the business school. I think also really I also took there was a public speaking class at Haas, and so I took that. It's not part of the core, but that was a really fantastic thing. I loved my corporate finance class taught by Steve Etter, who is still at Haas. And so I just loved that class because it made me think in new ways. And it's the mentorship that Steve gave to everyone in his class that was so special. It wasn't any specific case or thing I learned in this class, but I just remember really being forced to learn and think in new ways that have certainly carried with me. So I think there's definitely things that I think were helpful. But some of the really hard classes that were very technical, I kind of say, well, maybe they helped me learn better or learn how to learn better, but I certainly don't remember any of the really hard technical things that I learned. Where I took this really tough derivatives class, which kicked my butt. And so anyway, I think that's from a skills perspective. I think in terms of your second question, yeah, look, I think everyone has a different, risk tolerance, right? And I think this question of do you work and do a side business, it's a really intensely personal one. But I think as Mike and I sort of indicated, I think if you sort of zoom out and look at it from a abstraction level, how much risk are you willing to take in your life, and what can you do with and without to meet your bills or other family obligations or whatever you have that's personal to you? I think it's looking back, I would have taken more risk early in my life. Just the ability to not have to have responsibility to family or kids and school and plenty of other things. It's just easier to take risk earlier in life. It becomes harder and harder as you go along. So what I guess I would urge you to think about is, in 10 years, do you want to be still in the same position of sort of working and doing a side hustle, or do you want to just go do it? And if you kind of think in 10 years that you want to just go do it, then maybe you should think about doing it earlier.
Thank you so much.
Kevin, I'm hearing lots of people now talking to their parents. So Kevin told me, but I think we have 2 more questions to go.
This is an important, that's an important point. My parents hated the idea that I started a company at first. They wanted me to go back into finance. It's like, so anyway, that's certainly, again, it's personal to me, and that's certainly not, definitely do not advise going against, actively picking conflict with your parents. But I just knew I wanted to start my own company eventually. And I was like, why? I don't want to wait another 10 years to do it. I thought I was ready at 26. So, but that was my own journey. But certainly conflict with parents is not a uncommon thing for entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Mike, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything, or maybe with Alicia's question, you might. Alicia, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So thank you so much for first of all coming. It's such a pleasure to be talking to you guys. So I just wanted to know, like, really what really motivates you, because I think anything you start or anything you do, you need like a motivation or like some goal or some purpose to go on. So can you just talk about like what really kept you going so far, and like some words of wisdom that you could share with us, since we're like still college students and we need like motivation and that push every day.
I mean, for me, the thing that, my answer is very easy. I just really enjoy the process of making something, right? Particularly making something generally from scratch, right? So and all that's involved, right? The joys, the stresses, the learning new tech, and the innovating, whether it's innovating on tech or innovating on business model, or innovating on even just regions. Sometimes we chase after. I just really enjoy that process, and that kind of I thrive on that. So for me, that's kind of the motivation.
So I'll be honest, as I kind of talked about, because I grew up in a very money was kind of always a little bit of a challenge. I kind of admitted here that my first job, I was like, I made my decision just based on what paid the most. I think when I first got into entrepreneurship, when I first thought about really starting a company, I liked the idea of being my own boss, but I would say that my number one motivator was I wanted to achieve financial freedom. And I thought that entrepreneurship was the best chance to do it on a risk-adjusted basis, like obviously a lot more risky. Like, yes, I can maybe work another 30 years and achieve some financial freedom, or I can try to, dive into entrepreneurship. And so, of course, there's, from a financial theory perspective, risk is always, it's sort of boiled down into a platitude of, if there's no risk, there's no return, sort of thing. But it is true. If you could trade off certainty for risk and a lot more upside, but also chance of failure. And so I would say that to me was very motivating, was this idea that I could put my own destiny in my own hands. And it was certainly not a guaranteed outcome. And statistically, it's sort of, long odds that we'd be successful. But that was really attractive to me to put it in my own hands and do it. So I think for when I first started, I was certainly, there are other, motivating factors, but that was my biggest one. As I said, my second thing back, or I would say the second thing back then was I wanted to work on new things. And I didn't want to feel like there was this I felt like there was a generation of people when I was in investment banking and venture and a few other things. I was like, oh, we do it this way. This is how we've always done it. And I just I didn't feel wisdom in some of the things that we were doing, or it felt like I wanted to do something different. Why can't it be better? Why can't we try this? Why can't we try that? And so I love the idea of like being an entrepreneur and just going after it and be like, we're gonna go try it this way, and doing it that way. And the third thing back then was who could I work with? And as I said, it wasn't like on my top things, but it was sort of like I wanted to work with people I enjoyed working with. And I would say now that's probably become one of my top priorities. Is I like working with people I enjoy working with, that people that give me energy. So in a conversation or in a meeting or even at dinner or something, I don't want to be feeling like I'm stuck talking to somebody or doing something with somebody that I don't respect them ethically. I don't respect some other person, whatever it is. I just want, or they're, whatever it is. There's certain types of people I connect with and give me energy, and hopefully I give them energy. And that's who I want to spend my time with. And that's a big, part of, that's one of the nice things about being an entrepreneur, is you just sort of go create your own, team and work with people that you really want to work with, which is a huge benefit, I think. So yeah, I think those are the things that, and then I think, that's what drives me. And I think so today it's like work with people I want to work with. And then I love being on the edge. I love all the weird, wacky stuff, happening in the world. And I think that's where, on a risk-adjusted basis, it is by far the best thing to like go explore like a new frontier. Because by the time something's already kind of, for example, if you want to, not to knock it these days, but if you want to start an e-commerce company today, it's sort of, Amazon did that 25 years ago. You could still create a great business, but you're not on the frontier anymore. And that could still be exactly the right thing for you, because for everything you want. For me, it's like I love being on the wacky, end of things, and it's that's what drives me, and I've found that that's what I enjoy. So I think it's just trying to figure out the journey of figuring out who I am and what I enjoy. It's taken a long time, and it wasn't easy to admit that I was driven by money, in the earlier days, but looking back on it, I think I made mistakes early in my life, and just recognizing that some of my decision-making patterns weren't aligned with what some other things that I really cared about, has made me has made me appreciate and have more gratitude towards the journey I'm on today.
One thing that kind of in what you were saying reminded me of something I wanted to say, which is that entrepreneur doesn't mean that you have to be CEO, right? In my journey as an entrepreneur, I have discovered that I do not want to be CEO. I'm happy to be part of the conversations and decisions that Kevin makes, but I'm happy to let Kevin make that decision, right? And I'm happy to be the guy that focuses on the things that I like to do, like I said, making the product or building the team or whatever. And so being your own boss to some degree, yes, I'm kind of my own boss, but in reality, Kevin's probably my actual boss, and I'm happy for Kevin, and I'm fine for Kevin to be my boss. And so it just it doesn't mean that you have to be CEO if you become an entrepreneur. You can hire a CEO. We know plenty of entrepreneurs who end up hiring a CEO. Because that they ultimately discover that that's not the thing they enjoy the most out of the process. So
I thank you very much for your question. Thank you both for your answers. It is, and I appreciate your giving back. I'm going to share our code just so you know. We do ask students to give their feedback, and I'll share that with you tomorrow. I'm sure there's a way to improve it and gamify it. I don't know, Kevin's really got me going now. I'm like thinking how to make things better. Mike, maybe you could help me also actually implement it. It was phenomenal hearing both of you. I thank you for constantly giving back to Cal. It's amazing what keeps both of you going in terms of your generosity and also in terms of your new business. Can't wait to hear more about what's happening with what's next. Thank you.